I watched Marcus raise his glass across the conference room, his smirk sharp enough to cut steel. To Layla's failure, he announced to his team, loud enough for everyone on our floor to hear. Deal's dead. She's toast. His colleagues erupted in laughter, clinking their glasses while I stood frozen outside the glass walls. My proposal, 6 months of work, supposedly rejected minutes ago. But I didn't move. I didn't cry. I simply pulled out my phone, scrolled to the email I'd received exactly 4 hours earlier, and smiled. Because while Marcus was celebrating my supposed downfall, I was holding a signed backup contract that proved every word he'd spread was a lie. My name is Layla Morrison, and I'm a senior acquisitions director at Paramount Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago. I'd spent 8 years climbing from junior analyst to where I stood that September afternoon, and I'd earned every single promotion through 16-hour days, missed holidays, and more cold coffee than any human should consume. The corporate world isn't kind to women who show ambition, but I've learned to navigate it. Keep your head down, deliver results, and never give anyone ammunition to use against you. I thought I'd mastered that strategy until Marcus Chen joined our division. Marcus transferred from our New York office 6 months before this incident, arriving with a reputation for closing impossible deals and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was good at his job, I'll give him that, but he was also the type who measured his success by others' failures. From day one, he treated our department like a zero-sum game where only one person could win. I didn't particularly care about his competitive streak initially. I had my own clients, my own projects, and no interest in whatever masculine proving ground he thought he was playing on. The trouble started in March when our managing director, Patricia Holbrook, announced that one of us would be promoted to vice president of strategic acquisitions by year-end. The position came with a corner office, a substantial raise, and most importantly, a seat at the executive table where real decisions got made. Patricia didn't hide that she was considering both Marcus and me. She valued his aggressive deal-making style and my methodical, relationship-based approach. She wanted to see who could deliver the biggest win before making her choice. That's when I started working on the Meridian Industries account. Meridian was a manufacturing company looking to modernize their supply chain infrastructure, a project worth approximately $12 million over 3 years. It wasn't the flashiest contract, but it was solid, complex, and exactly the kind of long-term partnership that demonstrated strategic thinking rather than just quick wins. I'd been cultivating a relationship with their CEO, Richard Torrance, for almost 2 years through industry conferences and carefully timed check-ins. I never pushed, never oversold. I simply stayed present, offered insights when relevant, and waited for the right moment. That moment came in June when Richard called me directly. His company was ready to move forward, but they wanted a customized approach that went beyond our standard offerings. I spent the next 3 months designing a proposal that addressed every concern his board had raised, creating implementation timelines that accounted for their production cycles, and building in flexibility for the market uncertainties they feared. I worked weekends, skipped my sister's birthday dinner, and basically lived at the office. My assistant, Jamie, started keeping a blanket in my office because I'd fall asleep at my desk more often than I went home. Marcus noticed my intensity, of course. He started asking pointed questions during team meetings about what I was working on, who my clients were, whether I needed any support. I kept my answers vague, professional. I'd learned that sharing too much information in a competitive environment was like handing someone a loaded weapon and hoping they wouldn't use it. But Marcus was persistent. He'd swing by my office with coffee, ask how things were progressing, offer his perspective on deal structuring. I thought he was just being collegial, maybe even slightly intimidated by how much time I was investing. I was wrong. In late August, I submitted my proposal to Richard and his board. The presentation went better than I could have hoped. They asked smart questions, appreciated the level of detail, and Richard walked me out afterward with his hand on my shoulder, telling me he'd have an answer within 2 weeks. I felt cautiously optimistic. Not confident. I'd been in this business too long to count chickens, but hopeful. Then things got strange. Richard stopped returning my calls. His assistant, who'd always been warm and helpful, suddenly became formal and distant. When I finally got Richard on the phone, he sounded uncomfortable, rushed. He said they were still reviewing options and would be in touch. Something had shifted, but I couldn't identify what. I found out 3 days later through my contact in Meridian's legal department, a woman named Susan who I'd helped with some pro bono consulting for her daughter's nonprofit. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice tight with anger. "Layla, I don't know what's happening in your office, but you need to know someone's been calling Richard. Someone from Paramount who claims to have serious concerns about your proposal and your professional conduct." My stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" "They told Richard that your numbers were fabricated, that you'd overpromised on deliverables that Paramount couldn't actually provide, and that working with you specifically would put their project at risk because you were already overextended with other failing accounts. They said you were desperate for this deal because your job was in jeopardy." Susan paused. "Layla, is any of that true?" "Not a single word," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who called him?" "Did Richard say?" "He wouldn't give me a name, just said it was someone senior enough that he had to take the concerns seriously. Someone who claimed to be looking out for Meridian's best interests." Susan's frustration came through clearly. "I told Richard it sounded like internal politics, but he's spooked. The board's already nervous about spending this much, and now they're questioning whether Paramount's the right partner." After I hung up, I sat in my dark office for 20 minutes, forcing myself to think clearly rather than react emotionally. Someone at Paramount had actively sabotaged my deal. Someone who knew enough about the Meridian contract to make credible-sounding allegations. Someone who stood to benefit from my failure. The list of suspects was extremely short. I spent the next day gathering evidence. I pulled my call logs, email records, and project files. I documented every conversation I'd had about Meridian, noting who was present and what information was discussed. I reviewed my proposal line by line, verifying that every claim was accurate and every number was supported by our actual capabilities. I wasn't just defending myself, I was building a case. By Friday afternoon, I had confirmation. Marcus had been in the same industry conference where Richard spoke 2 weeks earlier. My colleague in marketing mentioned seeing them having drinks together, which I'd thought nothing of at the time. But now, knowing that Richard had received those calls shortly after, the timeline made sickening sense. Marcus had used my own networking strategy against me, getting close to my client just to poison the relationship. I wanted to march into Patricia's office immediately, to expose Marcus for the snake he was. But I forced myself to pause. If I went in with accusations but without absolute proof, it would look like sour grapes from someone losing a deal. Corporate politics doesn't reward the righteous. It rewards those who can prove their case beyond doubt. I needed more than suspicion and circumstantial evidence. So I did something I'd never done before. I called in a favor from an old friend who worked in corporate intelligence. Nothing illegal, just information gathering. Within 3 days, he confirmed that Marcus had indeed contacted Richard Torrance, and not just once, for separate calls over 2 weeks, each time raising new concerns about my proposal and my reliability. My friend even obtained phone records showing the calls originated from Marcus's personal cell, which he'd stupidly used instead of a burner. Armed with this information, I made a decision that went against every instinct I had. Instead of confronting Marcus or going to Patricia, I went directly back to Richard. I called him and asked for 30 minutes of his time, in person, no agenda. To his credit, he agreed, probably out of curiosity or maybe guilt for how he'd been avoiding me. We met at a coffee shop near Meridian's headquarters, neutral territory. I didn't bring my laptop or files. I just brought myself and the truth. "Richard, I know someone from my firm contacted you with concerns about my proposal. I'm not here to badmouth a colleague or make excuses. I'm here to address those concerns directly and let you make an informed decision." He looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "I appreciate that, Layla. To be frank, the allegations were serious enough that I had to pause. Your colleague suggested that Paramount might not be able to deliver on your promises." "My colleague lied to you," I said simply, "and I can prove it. But before I do that, I want to ask you something. In the 2 years we've known each other, have I ever been anything less than completely honest with you? Have I ever overpromised or underdelivered?" Richard's expression softened slightly. "No, you haven't. That's the only reason I'm sitting here instead of moving on to other vendors." I pulled out a single sheet of paper, not the elaborate proof package I'd assembled, just a simple document. This is a letter from Patricia Holbrook, my managing director, confirming that every deliverable in my proposal is fully supported by our current capabilities and resources. I had her review and sign it specifically because someone has been spreading lies, and I wanted you to have verification from the highest level in my organization. I slid the paper across the table. I also want you to know that I've identified who contacted you and why. This person is competing with me for a promotion, and sabotaging my deals advances his position. It's ugly office politics, and I'm embarrassed that it's touched your project. But I want to give you absolute confidence that working with me means working with someone who values integrity above advancement. Richard read the letter carefully, then looked up. You know who did this? I do. And I'm handling it through appropriate channels. But that's my problem, not yours. Your only question should be whether my proposal serves Meridian's needs better than the alternatives. I leaned back. I believe it does, or I wouldn't have spent 3 months developing it. But I'm not going to pressure you. Take whatever time you need. If you decide to go another direction, I'll be disappointed, but I'll understand. The meeting lasted another hour. Richard asked detailed questions about implementation, timelines, and support. I answered each one thoroughly, referencing specific sections of my proposal from memory. By the end, I could see his confidence returning. He didn't commit on the spot, but he shook my hand firmly and said he'd have an answer within a week. I left feeling cautiously hopeful again, but also exhausted. The emotional toll of being undermined by a colleague, of having months of work nearly destroyed by lies, was heavier than any late night or difficult client I'd ever faced. Back at the office, Marcus was riding high. He'd apparently landed a smaller but flashy contract with a tech startup, and Patricia had publicly congratulated him in our Monday team meeting. I watched him accept the praise with practiced humility, noting how he managed to mention several times how competitive the market was and how important it was to secure wins, even when others struggle. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. I said nothing. I just took notes and waited. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Richard's number. I stepped into an empty conference room before answering. Layla, it's Richard. I've discussed your proposal extensively with the board, and I want you to know that we're moving forward. We'll need a few minor adjustments to the timeline, but otherwise we're accepting your proposal as submitted. I closed my eyes, feeling relief wash over me. Thank you, Richard. I promise you won't regret this decision. I know I won't. And Layla? I also want you to know that I appreciate how you handled the situation with your colleague. It showed character. A lot of people would have thrown him under the bus or gotten defensive. You just focused on doing right by my company. He paused. For what it's worth, I called Patricia Holbrook yesterday and shared what happened. Not to get anyone in trouble, but because she should know the kind of people she has working for her. My heart skipped. You told Patricia? I did. She seemed quite interested to hear about it. Richard's tone suggested he knew exactly what bomb he'd just dropped. I'll have our legal team send over the contract details by end of week. After we hung up, I sat in that conference room processing what had just happened. Richard had gone to Patricia independently. I hadn't needed to make accusations or play political games. The truth had emerged on its own, from the most credible source possible, the client himself. I returned to my desk and worked quietly for the rest of the afternoon. Around 4 o'clock, I received an email from Patricia's assistant scheduling a meeting with me for the following morning. The subject line simply read, Meridian Contract Discussion. That evening, I prepared for the meeting the same way I prepared for everything, thoroughly and methodically. I compiled every piece of documentation related to the Meridian deal, including the timeline of Marcus's interference, though I didn't plan to lead with it. I also prepared a separate analysis showing how the contract would benefit Paramount's strategic positioning in the manufacturing sector. If Patricia wanted to discuss the sabotage, I'd let her drive that conversation. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:45, carrying only my tablet and a folder with the Meridian contract details. Patricia's office occupied the southwest corner of our floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Lake Michigan. She was already at her desk, reviewing documents, when her assistant showed me in. Layla, sit down. Patricia gestured to the chair across from her. She was in her mid-50s, sharp-featured and sharper-minded. The kind of woman who'd fought her way to the executive level when there were even fewer women in the room than there were now. I'd always respected her, even when I disagreed with her decisions. I had an interesting conversation yesterday with Richard Torrance. Patricia began without preamble. He told me about some concerns that were raised regarding your proposal. Concerns that originated from within Paramount. Yes, I'm aware of the situation, I said evenly. Are you aware that Marcus Chen was the one who contacted Mr. Torrance? Patricia's eyes were steady on mine. I suspected it, and I was able to confirm it through some discreet investigation. But I didn't bring it to you because I thought it would seem like I was making excuses or trying to undermine a colleague. Patricia's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. Richard said you handled it by going directly to him with facts and verification, rather than engaging in office politics. Is that accurate? It is. My priority was securing the contract for Paramount, not winning some internal competition with Marcus. The contract is confirmed, I understand. $12 million over 3 years, with potential for expansion. Patricia pulled up something on her computer. That's our second largest new contract this year. It's also exactly the kind of strategic, long-term partnership that aligns with where I want to take this division. She turned her screen toward me. It showed an organizational chart with my name in the VP of Strategic Acquisitions box. This is what I'm announcing next week. You've earned this position through consistent performance, strategic thinking, and professional integrity. The Meridian contract sealed it, but honestly, your response to being sabotaged told me more about your character than any deal could. I felt a rush of vindication mixed with relief, but I kept my expression professional. Thank you, Patricia. I won't let you down. I know you won't. She turned the screen back. Now, regarding Marcus. I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on his future here, because that would put you in an impossible position. But I want you to know that his behavior is unacceptable and will have consequences. What those consequences are will be determined by HR and myself over the next few days. I nodded. I appreciate you handling it. For what it's worth, Marcus is talented. He just needs to learn that success doesn't require sabotaging colleagues. Patricia's smile was thin. That's generous of you. More generous than he deserves, frankly. The meeting concluded with details about my new role, transition timeline, and expectations. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because of the promotion itself, though that was gratifying, but because I'd proven to myself that integrity could win in a corporate environment that often seemed to reward the opposite. I didn't tell anyone about the promotion. Patricia wanted to make the announcement formally at the following Monday's division meeting, and I saw no reason to jump the gun. I simply went back to my regular work, closing out some smaller projects and beginning the transition planning for Meridian. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to sense that something had shifted. He stopped his casual office visits, stopped asking about my projects. He became noticeably quieter in team meetings, his usual confident swagger muted. I wondered if Patricia had already had a conversation with him, or if he'd simply heard through office gossip that Richard had contacted her. Thursday afternoon, 2 days after my meeting with Patricia, I was working late when I heard a commotion from the hallway. Raised voices, though muffled by closed doors. I recognized one as Marcus's. After about 10 minutes, he emerged from Patricia's office, his face flushed and tight. He walked straight past my door without looking in, grabbed his coat from his office, and left. Friday morning, Marcus's office was empty. His desk had been cleared, his nameplate removed. By lunch, the office gossip mill was in full force. Marcus had been reassigned to a client services role in our smallest regional office, essentially a demotion that would likely lead to his resignation within months. Patricia had been characteristically quiet about the details, but the message was clear. Sabotaging colleagues had severe consequences. I felt no triumph watching his career implode. Honestly, I mostly felt sad that someone talented enough to succeed on merit had chosen shortcuts instead. But I also knew that his removal sent an important signal to everyone else in the division. Patricia was building a culture where results mattered, but so did integrity. The following Monday, Patricia announced my promotion to the assembled division. The applause was genuine, and several colleagues came by afterward to congratulate me. A few mentioned that they'd heard about the Meridian contract and were impressed by how I'd handled the situation. Office gossip had apparently filled in enough details that people understood Marcus hadn't left voluntarily. My first week as VP was consumed with meetings, strategy sessions, and the administrative chaos of transitioning into a new role. I hired Jamie as my executive assistant, promoted one of our junior analysts to take over my previous position, and started building the team structure I'd envisioned during all those late nights dreaming about this opportunity. The Meridian contract officially launched in October. I flew to their headquarters for the kickoff meeting, bringing 3 of our best implementation specialists. Richard greeted me warmly, and the day went smoothly. During a break, he pulled me aside. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "After our coffee shop meeting, I did some digging into what happened. I'm glad your company took appropriate action, but I also want you to know that it made me more confident about working with Paramount. A company that holds its people accountable is a company I can trust." "I appreciate that, Richard. And I promise we'll deliver everything we discussed." We did. Over the next 6 months, the Meridian implementation exceeded every benchmark. Their efficiency improved, their costs decreased, and Richard became one of our strongest advocates, referring 2 other manufacturing companies to us. That initial $12 million contract expanded to include additional services, and by the end of my first year as VP, Meridian represented one of our top 5 accounts. Marcus, meanwhile, lasted exactly 3 months in his new role before resigning. I heard through industry connections that he'd joined a competitor, though in a position junior to what he'd held at Paramount. I occasionally wondered if he'd learned anything from the experience, but I never followed up. Some people are capable of growth after failure, and some just move on to poison different wells. My promotion changed more than just my title. It gave me the authority to shape how our division operated, to hire people who valued collaboration over competition, and to build systems that rewarded long-term strategic thinking rather than quick wins at any cost. I implemented a peer review process for major proposals, partly to catch errors but also to prevent anyone from feeling isolated enough to resort to sabotage. I created mentorship programs pairing senior and junior team members, fostering relationships that made internal competition less cutthroat. Not everyone loved the changes. A few of our more aggressive dealmakers chafed at the collaborative approach, preferring the old model where individual stars could shine without worrying about team dynamics. 2 of them eventually left for other firms. I wish them well. I'd rather have a smaller team of people who lifted each other up than a larger team constantly undermining itself. By the end of my second year as VP, our division's revenue had grown by 38%. More importantly, our client retention rate had jumped to 92%, the highest in company history. Patricia highlighted both metrics in her annual report to the board, crediting the cultural shift toward integrity and collaboration. She also quietly told me that she was planning to retire in 3 years and wanted to prepare me to take over as managing director. I thought about that conversation often. About how close I'd come to losing everything because of Marcus's lies. About how I'd been tempted to fight fire with fire, to engage in the same kind of undermining he'd used against me. About how choosing the harder path, going directly to Richard with honesty rather than to Patricia with accusations, had ultimately led to better outcomes than any political maneuvering could have achieved. I'm not naive enough to think integrity always wins in corporate America. I've seen too many good people passed over for promotions, too many ethical corners cut in service of quarterly earnings, too many toxic leaders rewarded because they delivered results regardless of the bodies they left behind. But I also know that the kind of success built on sabotaging others is hollow and temporary. Marcus got his quick win when he poisoned my deal, got his moment of celebration with his team toasting my failure. But he lost everything that mattered, his reputation, his position, and ultimately his career trajectory, because he couldn't sustain success built on lies. Sometimes late at night when I'm working in my corner office, I think about that afternoon when I watched Marcus raise his glass and declare me toast. I remember the fury I felt, the hurt, the desperate desire to expose him immediately. I'm grateful I didn't give in to those impulses. Not because I'm some saint who's above revenge, but because I learned that the best response to someone trying to destroy you isn't matching their tactics. It's building something so solid, so well documented, so thoroughly grounded in truth that their lies can't touch it. The backup contract I'd been holding, the one I'd smiled about while Marcus celebrated, wasn't just the signed agreement from Meridian. It was every relationship I'd built over years, every promise I'd kept, every client I'd served with complete honesty. That was the contract no one could poison with lies, because it was written in actions rather than words. Marcus taught me something valuable, even if he didn't mean to. He taught me that in a competitive environment, your greatest protection isn't matching your rival's ruthlessness. It's being so consistently reliable, so thoroughly professional, so completely honest that when someone tries to undermine you, people's first instinct is to doubt the accusation rather than believe it. Richard took my side not because I defended myself eloquently, but because 2 years of interactions had already proven who I was. I still compete. I still work long hours, still push for major contracts, still want to win. But I compete against market challenges and client needs and my own limitations, not against my colleagues. When someone on my team closes a big deal, I celebrate genuinely rather than calculating how it affects my relative position. When someone struggles, I offer support rather than seeing an opportunity to advance. These aren't just nice-sounding principles, they're strategic choices that make our whole division stronger. The corporate world hasn't suddenly become fair or kind. There are still Marcus Chens out there, still people who'll spread lies to get ahead, still systems that reward aggression over integrity. But there are also Patricia Holbrooks who recognize the difference between genuine success and success built on sabotage. There are Richard Torrances who value honesty over smooth talking. There are enough good people in positions of power that doing the right thing isn't always career suicide. 3 years after that September afternoon, I stood in the same conference room where Marcus had toasted my failure. This time I was the one raising a glass, celebrating our division's record-breaking year. Every person in that room had contributed to our success, and I made sure to acknowledge specific achievements rather than just congratulating myself. When I finished my remarks, the applause was warm and genuine. No one was celebrating someone else's downfall. We were celebrating what we'd built together. Later that evening, after everyone else had left, I stood at the window looking out at the Chicago skyline. My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia, officially announcing her retirement and recommending me as her successor to the board. The decision wouldn't be final for another month, but her support carried enormous weight. I thought about sending a message to Marcus, something magnanimous about how I'd learned from our conflict and hoped he'd found success in his new position. But I didn't. Not because I was still angry, I'd long since moved past that, but because some chapters close on their own without needing a final word. Marcus had made his choices and faced his consequences. I'd made mine and earned my success. Our stories had diverged that September afternoon when he chose lies and I chose truth, and there was nothing left to say about it. What I did instead was send a note to my team, thanking them for their work and outlining my vision for the coming year. I CC'd Richard Torrance and several other key clients, not to show off but to demonstrate the collaborative approach that had become our division's hallmark. Within an hour, responses started coming back, enthusiastic, supportive, full of ideas for new projects and partnerships. That's when I knew I'd truly won. Not by destroying Marcus or getting revenge or proving I was better than him. I'd won by building something sustainable, something based on trust and competence rather than manipulation and fear. The promotion, the corner office, the potential managing director position. Those were nice outcomes, but they weren't the victory. The victory was lying down each night knowing I'd earned everything through honest effort and waking up each morning with colleagues who respected rather than feared me. The office gossip mill eventually moved on to other stories, other dramas. Marcus's name came up less and less frequently, until finally it didn't come up at all. His attempted sabotage became just another cautionary tale that senior people occasionally referenced when mentoring junior staff. Work hard, play fair, and let your results speak for themselves, they'd say. Otherwise you'll end up like that guy who poisoned Layla's deal and lost everything. I never corrected the narrative when it got simplified or exaggerated in retelling. The truth was complicated. Marcus hadn't poisoned the deal, he just tried to. I'd saved it through honest engagement with the client. But the simplified version served a purpose, reinforcing the culture Patricia and I were trying to build. Sometimes stories matter more for what they teach than for their precise accuracy. 5 years later, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Marcus. He'd apparently rebuilt his career at a smaller firm, working his way back up to director level. His message was brief: saw your promotion to managing director. Congratulations. You deserved it. I didn't handle our competition well, and I'm sorry for how I acted. I learned from it, for whatever that's worth. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let that chapter remain closed. But another part recognized that the apology, however late, took some courage. I wrote back, "Thank you for reaching out. I'm glad you found success. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." His reply was immediate: "I learned that shortcuts always come back to bite you. Took me longer than it should have, but I got there. Hope you're building something good at Paramount." I wrote back. "We are." That was the end of our conversation. I didn't friend him or stay in touch or offer to grab coffee for old time's sake. Some connections aren't meant to be maintained. But I appreciated the closure, the acknowledgement that his actions had been wrong and that he'd grown from the experience. It didn't change what happened, but it suggested that maybe the whole terrible episode had served some purpose beyond just my career advancement. Looking back now from the managing director's office that Patricia vacated 6 months ago, I can see how that September afternoon fundamentally shaped who I became as a leader. I could have won my promotion through political maneuvering, by exposing Marcus first and turning the situation into a weapon against him. But that would have taught everyone watching that success came from being better at office politics than your rivals. Instead, by focusing on serving my client and letting the truth emerge naturally, I demonstrated that success could come from doing excellent work and trusting that quality would be recognized. That lesson permeates everything I do now. When I hire, I look for people with strong ethics as much as strong skills. When I evaluate performance, I consider how someone achieved their results as much as what results they achieved. When conflicts arise, I dig beneath the surface accusations to find the truth, rather than just siding with whoever makes the more compelling argument. Marcus taught me to be skeptical of easy narratives and to value substance over presentation. The Meridian contract, that deal Marcus tried to poison, is still active today. We've expanded our partnership into new areas, and Richard recently joined Paramount's advisory board. At the ceremony celebrating his appointment, he pulled me aside and said, "You know, I almost didn't take your call that day when you asked to meet. I was ready to just move on to another vendor. But something told me you wouldn't reach out unless you had something important to say. I'm glad you listened to that instinct," I told him. "Me too. That contract changed my company, and watching how you handled the situation changed how I think about business partnerships. Competence matters, but so does character." I've built Meridian's entire vendor strategy around that principle now. That's the real legacy of that awful September, not my promotion or Marcus's demotion, but the ripple effects of choosing integrity over expediency. Richard learned to value character in his partners. Patricia learned that her cultural instincts about rewarding honest work were correct. My team learned that they could succeed without sabotaging each other. And I learned that the strongest foundation for success is built from truth, even when lies seem more convenient. I still compete. I still push for wins and celebrate victories. But I compete in a way that builds up rather than tears down, that creates value rather than just redistributing it. When my team closes a major deal, I don't wonder who we beat or who lost out. I focus on how we served the client and what we learned from the process. When someone else in the industry succeeds, I can congratulate them genuinely because their success doesn't diminish mine. That's what Marcus never understood. He thought success was a finite resource that had to be taken from others. I learned it's something you build, and the more you help others build it too, the more there is for everyone. My division's success hasn't come at the expense of other departments. It's pulled the whole company forward. Our collaborative culture hasn't made us soft. It's made us stronger by eliminating the wasted energy of internal competition and redirecting it towards serving clients. Sometimes people ask me how I dealt with the stress of that period, the uncertainty of having my work sabotaged and my career threatened. The honest answer is that I didn't deal with it particularly well in the moment. I had sleepless nights, stress headaches, and more than a few tearful conversations with my sister about whether it was all worth it. But I got through it by focusing on what I could control: the quality of my work, the honesty of my client relationships, the thoroughness of my documentation. I couldn't control Marcus's choices or Patricia's initial reactions or Richard's doubts. but I could control how I responded to those challenges. I could choose to engage with integrity, even when integrity seemed like a handicap. I could choose to trust the process, even when shortcuts seemed appealing. Those choices were hard and often painful, but they were mine, and they led to outcomes I can be genuinely proud of. The corner office I sit in now has floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, just like Patricia's old office. On particularly clear days, I can see for miles. That view reminds me to think long-term, to build things that last beyond quarterly earnings and annual reviews. Marcus wanted quick wins and immediate recognition. I wanted something sustainable. He got his moment of triumph toasting my failure. I got a career built on solid ground.